Okay, we're going into part 2 now of origins of blue eyes and blue-eyed people. Already in the last part, it talked about quite a few things. If you haven't seen it yet, go to the very end of this video. In the last 30 seconds, it'll give you ability to click on one in the top left-hand corner, and it will take you back. In the first area, hopefully if that's what you've done here, at the end of that video, there will be a link in the top left-hand corner, and it will lead you on. My video series always work that way, and the last one will go back to the first usually, so if you do catch it in part 2 or 3 or anything, you can easily go back. Where we were before we ended off was talking about tales even showing this effect in the Americas. And I want to preface this by saying that even if you tried to take all of this out of the situation, the rest of it still stands. And in fact, with the rest of it still standing, it makes this much more plausible. So let's just go into this a little bit. He was called Viracocha by the Incas, Kukulkan by the Mayas, Quetzalcoatl by the Aztecs, Gucumatz in Central America, Votan in Palenque, and Zamna in Izamal. He, in some cases, and his men with him, were described as being tall, bearded, with white, pale skin, and beautiful emerald blue eyes. Fray Juan Torquemada, the Franciscan missionary who collected traditions about Quetzalcoatl from the natives of Old Mexico, says Quetzalcoatl had blonde hair and wore a black robe sewn with little crosses of red color. One of the little tellings that I've seen of this, don't know if it's totally valid or not, they made indications that they were extra sewn in little crosses, and that by the way it was described to them, the people that they were describing it didn't have this technique. Described as something else, like perhaps overstitching or something like that that goes in. It didn't appear that it was just, you know how a fabric and you can change colors and when you do a weave, it wasn't like this. It was something different. But a blackened robe with red crosses of color. Now these pictures that we're seeing here are taught in Mexico today, for this comes directly out of a book. As you can see, it's from the Educationary Republic of Mexico. And they show you that he was a bearded man and almost looks like Jesus here. In fact, in the other depictions they show of him, he quite a bit looks like what we have of our depiction of Jesus. And people have tried to say, oh, well, this was Jesus. Whenever he died, he came here and he came in there. Stop that. This came well before that, and it was a different situation. In fact, they talked to it in a different way. In fact, the things that were said and done to him, you wouldn't have said would have been Jesus. That would have been somebody heralding civilization and agriculture and things, and that's not what Jesus was about. So it's about spirituality, so let's not throw everything upon it like that. But then again, if you believe Jesus is the, okay, well, let's just set that aside for a second as we talk about this. For here you see this man that is sitting up on a dais, and it looks something like a carry-on, where it would be much like, the Ark of the Covenant, where you can pick this thing up. Strangely enough, there is sticks that are made into snakes, like magic maybe, and it makes up his carry-all that's here onto it, right? Again, we see a symbolize of a unified snake, but in this situation, oddly, it's not two snakes coming together. It's two snakes looking forward and looking back. Now, this can be looking forward in time and looking back, or looking both directions, or having gone to the east and gone to the west, or a lot of ways could be looked at this, but then again, is that same serpent symbology. Now, when we see something like this, in serpent symbology, and you see it other places slightly different and so on like that, a lot of people want to make connections. And if this was the only simplistic part of it that people would see, you would say, oh, well, it might be convergence, where they just had something similar due to the fact that snakes are poisonous or this, that, and the other, and they could bring it along. And a lot of people carry this and have that concept, and I understand that. But whenever you start to see it more and more, it starts to get to the point of going, there's got to be something more to this. And then you find the mythology that goes with it, and it's like, that's too conspicuous. And then it's not just the snake, but it's this part, and this thing, and this thing, and this thing. And you're like, hold on a minute. That's a little bit too telling right there. And then, well, the tales of their own, the gods that came and brought them all this agriculture and stuff, they seem to look like this. I did a video recently where a guy was trying to dismiss it and say that they had adopted it in somehow. But you can see clearly in these depictions and the storytelling that they have of it that that's exactly what the ancients had said and they had carried down to them. Something that was strange to them. They don't have beards and stuff of this god that had these beards and these things. And I've often said, well, they could have carried this on from a thought coming from before going across that ice bridge and so on. Well, who else came across that ice bridge, like Kennewick Man and other people? But it doesn't necessarily have to do with that. For if we look, everything hinges on this Bering Strait idea when the land bridge happened. But we have found places in North America that quite predate that ability. And so if that corridor wasn't open, then their little idea doesn't open up. But it goes back 22,000 BC, and what the hell? Solutrean artifacts have been found all the way through, even in Galt, Texas, here below me, showing you that they had some kind of range. And what was always strange to people studying the Amerindians is that the eastern side of America had different cultures quite a bit than the western side whenever we ended up running into them later, already being known about us. And it's like, that's weird. But most people think of Indians as being one conglomerate, but whenever you go into it, there were quite a few variations on the theme, and quite a few of them didn't like each other, so on, although there were somewhat civilized tribes. You find these ancient mounds and so on that go on there, and the people tell you that it doesn't really associate with it, but in a modern way, we've turned around and actually told them, no, it does associate with them. And they go, well, no, it didn't. We used to not live here. We used to live many moons ago, and they're like, no, you did us, and that just gets carried on and carried on, and you can just go a couple of generations, and then nobody knows any better, and then we're just off of hearsay, and then oh, well, maybe we can make up something else and tell you something else that's different, or try to come to grips with it. But this is one of the things that they've not been able to come to grips with it yet, and they say you don't have any evidence, and then you find all these warri mummies and all these things and statues with beards and blue eyes on them and everything, and they go, yeah, that's him, and this is the thing, and and they go, well, then you weren't lying. So who's trying to make up a PC correct kind of version of this thing here all of a sudden from what came out of it? Now you look at things like this and they have this headdress of feathers, but we've seen feathers being hooked up to Proto-Indo-Europeans and actually all people through the Middle East. At one time it was quite a decoration, but you say, oh, it's just a decoration or this, that, and other. No, birds had an incredible thing to do with their whole religion and rebirth and all the things, all the way back from things like condors or buzzards and stuff, and you think, well, that's just a carry and pickup thing, but that's what they used to carry away the dead and so on. It gives you eagle's wings. It gives the wings that are around the sun disk. We've made all these connections before. Let's just continue here. So after looking at this, scientists stress that the genetic variation that they say of the Waris and all these people that have the blonde hair they've shown, as the press release put it, it is neither a positive nor a negative trait. And that's a bit disingenuous, as the mutation also produces greater instances of blonde hair, sexually selected for even today, and fair skin, which confers a survival advantage by stimulating greater production of vitamin D in the sun-starved northern European countries near the Arctic Circle, where blue eyes are still most prevalent. Now we look at this and you say, okay, yeah, like more north and you get closer to the ice areas, and that, of course, whenever summer is going on, the sun is well hitting up around on this band that's here, but whenever it goes to winter, it goes south and it's shining on that part of it, and there's not as much light that's up here. And of course, the pale skin that we have that melanates in hard sun for a protective, going, no, I'm getting enough, and I, put it off. So it's this adaptable melanin that goes for that, right? But it would have been adaptable for both situations because it has both adaptations. It's amazing. You can tan to this or you can pale out to that, and you can look at even this grading of color here that's really about blue eyes, but you could also say I could understand how people would be less tanned up in Scandinavia and more tan down there. Now you take a Swedish bikini girl back in the days of Hawaiian Tropic and all these oils for women were trying to definitely get tan, and you can see that they can definitely get quite a tan, but they're not exposed like that because they get less sunlight. And this makes it to where a person is extremely adaptable and they could live in certain environments or whatever, and even with minimized sunlight because of the catastrophes or who knows whatever, they're still getting their vitamin D production. Now you can get it out of foods and everything too, but this is a safeguard also in some way and helped out those people. Now you'd say, oh, it's just one little mutation. No, let's go back for a second for part one when we were talking about how the light skin situation apparently goes back over 600,000 BC. When you say something like that, and they thought that, humans were only 200,000 BC at the time, now we find it 315,000 BC, predating Neanderthal and all that too. So it's weird how it staggers now. For it used to be this, and then Neanderthal, and then Cro-Magnon came, and it's like, well, no, actually, Homo sapiens goes from before that. So then, how does this variative happen, and how did the Neanderthal come up out of these people that supposedly come out of Africa? Well, when you find out all that, it kind of destroys that idea that that's not the way that it even worked, and it sure wasn't a whoop like they tried to put off. It is quite more complicated than that, and a lot of integration and back integrations. But make no mistake about it, the blue area that they're showing here is pretty much under ice during the last ice age, and so people were pushed down much further. And when you look at something like this, they're saying this is where people are now, and this is not where people were from before. When you talk about Proto-Indo-Europeans and movements and things and all this other stuff that goes into that ideal, and the truth of the matter is we're looking at something modern, not the people that were there. It would be just as simple to say, okay, let's go to Hawaii. See all of these Oriental people and these white people? Neither one of those were here. It was all people that looked like, see this Maori looking? Yeah, that guy. Right there. Those were the people, Tahitian and all that. Yeah, closely related. Those little conglomerates of islanders, they were living in that. See how different that was? So when we look at this map here of Northern Europe, this is showing you where blue eyes are and where they're not. And people would look at this gradient instantly and go, aha, they're up in here, but they don't got none down in the lower parts. Not true. Whenever you get to a blackened type state, which is over here, in an area that definitely used to be Proto-Indo-Europeans, there are people now that have it still, but it's somewhere around 10%. But if we go to the chocolate brown, it goes 10 to 25%. And it shows in North Africa and all this stuff too, but at one time that was way a whole lot more. And we talked about the Egyptians and even showed the pictures, Sumerians and everything else. So what looks blue and brown, there was a whole lot more blue on this map at one time. You get the lighter blue, type milk chocolate if you will, looking, and that's 25 to 35%. That's coming up to Spain and France and places like that. And then you get 50 to 75%, so half or more definitely all through. And then in Scandinavia, hooked up with Dan of the Bible and so on that we'd all gone through a long time ago, get 75 to 90%. You also look at their genetics and you can see how that works out too, but make no mistake, we've realized too that a lot of these people used to be to the right of the map and lower and in the Middle East and in Egypt and stuff that carried this trait versus where we see it now today. 95% of Europeans and Scandinavian countries have blue eyes. Some of the people that don't have blue eyes have green though. They're also found to have a higher range of hair and skin color that are blonde or red. Comparatively, Europe has a wider variety of hair color and skin pigment than is found in any other continent in the world. When you talk about people of color, and that's more colors here. It's not just someone that's been melanated. So even through areas, and it's difficult to talk about this situation, but easy to see whenever you can see that the northern India people have a contingent that looks like this, very strong. In the middle, it weakens out in what looks like a Mexican map here with the colors, but then towards the south are a Tamil type people and Dravidians. When you look at their phenotype, they're a Caucasoid type phenotype in a lot of them. There's other phenotypes that's more islander, edging on an idea of people like in Australia and so on. And people have realized that that has to do with their genetics and hominids that had to do with them and Denisovans and so on. And you say, well, Denisovan makes the black skin then. And they go, no, because the Scandinavians even have some Denisovan in them, and they're the lightest ones going on. So it doesn't work that way. It's not that you just put a little more chocolate in your milk and stir it up and it gets a little darker. There's genetics that went all through that. And whenever you talk about this darkness thing, this is a somewhat recent phenomenon with people that are known as Negroids. The oldest one is Asillar man, 4400 BC. The oldest proto-form, which their proto right before that, goes to 9100 BC. So when we talk about people that are Australian Islanders that are so much back before, that's somebody that predates them quite a bit, and an archaic form of a darkened skinned people that are known to have gone to the islands and stuff. Now, always been strange to me that they want to say, oh, well, they had boats, but then they lost that technology somehow, but they sure had it because they made it there. There's no other way around that. But then other people that got around and knew, they say that, well, they probably didn't have boats. Well, we've realized that that boating concept goes much farther back. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was the first popular leader of Indian independence in India and their movement. In 1903, he wrote the book Arctic Home of the Vedas. In it, he argued that the Vedas could only have been composed in the Arctics or written about that, and the Aryans brought them south after the onset of the Ice Age. And that's where the original form of that comes in the older stories. And then the second movement, as I told you there was two, comes into the second. And this is where you get the Mahabharata and the stories that come on that, Mahabharata, and the stories that come out of that. And we talked recently how they talk about how quite a few of these people had blonde hairs and beards and things like that. And then these marvels, which were actually ended up being carts pulled by animals that they didn't have and didn't understand. It was almost like magic. Yeah. These things like Vimanas that we talk about. And we're not going to go off into that and melted mercury and all this stuff, but these mutations are relatively recent as Europe was colonized only a few thousand years ago. Now we understand that, how it was pushed down during the last ice age and so on. So where were everybody? Well, ta-da! Say mainstream scientists, they say, well, it's only been a few thousand years ago. When you look at people like the Basques and so on, you can find that, well, there were still people here because there was below the ice and people living there, and how it went back and forth and interconnected. And we talked about recently how they came through, and the brownies and the fairies and the elves, and how that worked out. And it's still kept in a strange mythology today. And the pointy-eared idea goes back to satyrs and all this other stuff with iconography that they had. It's pretty simple in some ways, but quite difficult in others. Through interbreeding, the brunette with blue eyes, Neanderthal type, was evidenced about 35 to 25,000 years ago by invading Cro-Magnon types from the Atlantic, tall, Rh-negative blood type, and Solutrean toolkits. Now, we talked about Solutreans being in the Americas, perhaps because they found their bones, and that's like a pre-Clovis type. And then Clovis is what disappeared with the end of the last ice age, and then in come those Indians. So there's something that went on before. The reason we don't really study it much is for generations and generations they've had this idea of Clovis first, and so you can't have that thing that exists right there. Oh, well, there's another one. Here's a bunch more. Here's some even found deeper at about 22,000. Oh, don't freak out. If I dug 10 foot deeper and I found that mammoth bones had been carved on by somebody, couldn't have been an animal, at 130,000 years, oh, and they just pass out. You're like, just going through reality here and what we're finding. Before they found the first dinosaur, they didn't know those exist. Come on, everybody, breathe in and out. Let's look at this. Oh, it doesn't fit our new little idea. Your little idea doesn't have to fit with reality, apparently. Let's try to stick with reality. It's going to work out better long term. It's gotten us right to here. The question really is, why do we go from having nobody on Earth known with blue eyes, supposedly, 10,000 years ago, having 20 to 40% of Europeans having blue eyes now, and it reaching up in the 90 percentile range of that? Well, they tell you that these people that used to be related to them came out of the Black Sea region, and that they're related to them, and people say, oh, well, that's when Blue Eyes people started. And it's like, no, they tell you already. They know that Cro-Magnon had this effect. Neanderthals had red and auburn type of hair, and it's thought that that might have been able to impart people with some of those traits. So when you say something like that and you follow it up that, it just goes, what? Yeah, so this directive thing that's been said that people go, oh, see, you're not as old as, well, how old does it go? Well, there's one simple way that they found that it goes back much older than anybody thinks, and they did it with genetics. They found that Cro-Magnon DNA sequence from 28,000 years old was obtained from fossil bones discovered in Puglisi Cave in Italy. The results show the DNA sequence is identical to the DNA sequences of certain modern Europeans. The DNA sequences was remained static and unchanged for 28,000 years. This means that Cro-Magnon was fully modern individual who perhaps had larger brain capacity than we even have today slightly. Yeah, and boom. And they've made recreations of him, and he looks very much like a modern man. So that's been around for that long and had that trait too, but that's nothing new. For the skin trait and things that go along with that say that really any of the darker skin would have been an aberration. Even if you shave a chimp, it's got lighter skin. There's only gorilla and bonobo really to have that, so that's going to be a rarer thing, not something that everything was and these came out of it. In fact, with the float of the ice ages, what made them prosperous and helpful through the whole process seemed to have been this helpful trait. It helped them keep good bones, not have rickets and all these things during times of strife, just by getting sun and some nutrition. Works a whole lot better, and you don't have to necessarily be in a high sun area because you're so melanated that it's blocking out so much of it otherwise. Things like milk and stuff, and drinking milk and adding more calcium and things like that, of course, helped out too. And we put vitamin D in milk today, and people understand that and don't even know how that all works. But it's to help out that situation, because of lack of sunlight and so on, you'll end up having rickets. Perhaps these sun worshippers had a lot more going on than people want to give credit for. You look at this burial that's right here and the amount of beating that went on to this, and you can tell this was somebody who meant something. Each one of these are individually drilled out and set like he had bangles all over him. Any much more than that, you would almost consider it to have been on an armor type. In fact, I've shown a video where there's split bones done sideways, more paneling, and layered on each other like shingles on a roof, and it's a bone type of armor. Well, what would that take? Well, stick your arm in front of somebody else and they hit you with a blunt weapon and it breaks your arm, but what does it do to them? Well, you took most of the blows, so I didn't take much, and it breaks that bone. But now, once that bone area is broke, it's going to cause much more problems. It's kind of the reason they didn't go and continue with that, but what a lot of people don't give credit for is that on the backside of that bone is double leathered up things. And so when you have something trying to poke through there, it has to glance off that, taking and deflecting, and then trying to make it through. And it's just like, oh, trying to kill a rhinoceros, and you go up and you poke him, and it doesn't even really poke in real good. Helps out, makes your skin tougher. Bark skin, things like that. They talk about Dungeons and Dragons that you can end up getting an enchantment. Just makes you tougher, adds armor class. They use it to classes that don't usually wear tough armor, and it helps your armor class up to the point to where you are like you're wearing tough armor, and you're still not. John Hawks of the University of Wisconsin in Madison said this gene is something good for people, this blue-eye gene. It makes them have more kids. In contrast, most mammals on Earth share the normal form of the gene. The 6-letter sequence is exactly the same among mice, horses, cows, rats, dogs, cats, monkeys, chimpanzees, and humans with brown eyes. Just a simple thing they tried in their genetics, you know. But no word on what gives Siberian Huskies and Siamese cats blue eyes. But it's figured out that from people long ago who used to domesticate animals had ended up taking a wolf in a primordial form, and by breeding, line breeding, and inbreeding with them, formed the snow dogs like Malibutes and so on, and Huskies that we have today in this blue-eyed form. But it was also done with Australian Shepherds, and they have one blue eye. That's strange because all these people said blue eyes had to do with divinity and so on. Even Alexander the Great had one blue eye, and they say that he was half divine, almost like a demigod, because of such. So again, we see this form of a twisted cross, if you will. But if you just put a cross in the sky and then you start spinning it around, it kind of get this effect. And the wheel in the sky that keeps turning. I don't want to talk about all the things that it means. Let's talk about all the places that it has been found from ancient times. And it'll show you a place that people had been that nowadays they don't want to act like they had been. And it's not just due to transference. For here we see it's still evident in India to this day, and it's got Ganesh, it looks like, on it there. But in Russia, and in fact it used to be on Russian money and everything too. Oh, well, yeah, well, after World War II, all this is kind of, let's just step back to the day before World War II, and this is well known for everybody. And found out by these people, the Germans, and made connections back to elder times and so on. Now I don't want to go into, hey, what Hitler found out, but let's continue, because here in Detroit, Michigan, in America was the same symbology used on planes and things I talked about. But the ancient Etruscans used to have it in their stuff too. And oh yeah, in ancient Sumerian, Iraq, it's right in the middle of that bowl. Strangely, you'd look at that bowl and you say, it's got to be Oriental or something. It looks like it has some land on it, and the whole land is there, and the fish are in the ocean swimming around it. And even though it's a swastika, then there's this cloudish land, and it too is swirling around in a swastika. In fact, the fish swimming are making everything, and they're all going around with it. Isn't that amazing? But even the iconography on the rim of the bowl is cut in zigzags and swastikas. We find it again here in Poland. And you go, well, Poland, World War II. Oh, no, this is there with it, yeah. Navajo. Oh, that throws a totally different thought into it, too. How about something as far as Tibet? And a skull that's carved in bas relief. They have this symbology there, and it's well known for them, and it has nothing to do. In fact, none of these except for that German had anything to do with that German thing that you try to put on it nowadays. But it did add something connective that they knew. How about in Peru, in ancient jugs that are in burials that way predate anybody possibly going over here? How about those ancient Hittites of Anatolia? And look at this lace work that's done out of it. Something you can hang in a window and watch it come through, and it makes a picture even on the ground. Like looking through the windows of Lalibela, which have that in there, and we'll see that. The Hopewell Indians, and it's made out of snakes. And it just makes even more connections. The Thracians and how they have it on there, and then there's, again, that double-headed eagle that we're so familiar with being on so many iconographic maps and people's flags and iconography that keeps going on, just like there's lions. You say, there ain't no lions in Europe. Well, there used to be lions in Europe, but also the people in Europe used to be around lions a whole lot more. Something that's kept. Anglo-Saxons, I'll be damned. No, I won't, for they've been blessed. How about ancient Korea? Yeah, it's right there too. How about in Iran itself? Yeah, there's ones. How about Italy? Yeah, it looks like a little dragon's head spinning around in a circle, making that same form. Kind of horse-like too. In ancient Armenia. And there's sacred flowers of life, and it's all interwoven with each other. Aztecs had this and show it in calendar symbology and all kinds of things. For it works that way. Sun come up, moon go down, worlds spin round and round. Ethiopia and Lalibela, and it's not just this, but they have Stars of David and so on. And this was made by people who are professed to be the Templars. Even the locals there tell you that some white angels by nighttime built all of this. In a modern day, they want to, oh, no, 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 and try to say something else and get people believing a different directive, and that these people, and you're like, cool, show me something since then that you've done that's just like this. There's not. In fact, when I was a kid, we were all trying to save their life. We used to have jokes about Ethiopians and stuff like that. It's kind of part of what it went politically correct right there about it too. You pull out your neck a little and you can say, look, he's starving on a piece of rice, because they were begging for us to send money. They couldn't sustain themselves. But that's got a lot of other things to do with it too. Well, it was found in ancient Japan under crests. And it's not just one. In any situation here, I can show you, it's not just one accidentally. They one day what? The Anasazi of the ancient Southwest and the Americas. The Basque, and it looks like a propeller almost going on there. But yea, even in Israel, in ancient mosques, and there's mosaics that have it in there, which it looks exactly like the Greek form, for a very good reason that we looked at earlier, but you can find it directly next to Stars of David. And in fact, at World War II, before it happened, there were coins that were commemorated, one side having the Star of David, one having the swastika, and the people that were Ashkenazi moving to a place that was about to be recreated as being the Holy Land. That's something totally different. So this is looking over Atlantean Gardens and his post and how we put a few things together, and that's just a few of the many references that you can find to this type situation and symbology that goes along. And it's not just this symbol right here, sorry, but it's everything that goes along with other things too. You could say this could have happened due to convergence. Then you start finding 5, 6, 8 connectives, and it gets to the point where you go, there must have been something. Did they keep it from before they even came into the Americas and learned it from Proto-Indo-Europeans anciently? Or was there extra connection afterwards? Well, all these Wari people and these blonde-haired mummies and stuff, and these tales of this guy that looks very much like that, blue eyes even in their leaders, and these people that are here, and blue eyes all around the world, and Sumerians that had it, and of course the Egyptians and all their, the same type of thing. It's not something special happens here, people. You can see easily. There you go. Linguistics makes the connection, other than symbology. But you can see here from the most ancient of civilizations that we can dig up to this date, there are these people that are all connected with it, either directly or in a leadership and assistance role an extreme way, getting their whole deal going on, and they get this iconography and this concepts understood about seasons. Now things change, and around the equator, it isn't very prevalent for you seeing it. Somebody that's more north or more south, you might be able to say, when it gets cold and then it comes back and then the flowers start growing more and it gets warm and everything, and you can easily see that effect. But if you're in the middle part, it doesn't happen so much. So how long ago did they start learning about this and migrating and doing things like that? And no, man, that dates way the hell back. We're looking at 28,000, but I'm telling you again, that wasn't the first person that did it. Just like whenever they tell you that blue eyes come from that one person that was around there and they're all related to that guy, he had a father and they carried that trait and it went way back. How far does it go back? Well, they say at least 60,000 years. And they say the possibility of that trait due to light skin and hair and everything goes back 600,000 years. Look at my video on that and you'll be able to see that. But so who were the pre-dynastic and forming Egyptians here with these crystal Upart eyes that they have going on? The Sumerians and Anuna gods. Even gods strangely on the other side of the world in Peru. Strange offhand places like India that people want to dismiss. China and so on that went in there and Tarim Basin mummies. And then an area in Turkey hooked up to the Tigris and Euphrates in ancient days where it shows Urfaman and Göbekli Tepe and the people that had brought apart that. And we see it there, and is that the burgeoning moment? No, you can tell right there. They have all of these circles going on in these things. This was not some brand new thing in any way, shape, or form. Did they make all the other ones out of wood? I doubt it. In fact, if you look under that hill, you'll find more. We've talked about 6 or 8 places that are just like Göbekli Tepe. There's one that dates a little bit older than what we have found at Göbekli Tepe yet, but we haven't dug them all up. You can't say, oh, this is the date of it without digging up all those other ones that we know are already still there. For you might find ones that go back and back and back, and it could go back much, much farther. It's not going to probably go 40,000 or anything like that, but who knows if it's actually that itself is sitting on to an ancient tell that has some old mammoth stuff and things that does date to that age, and that was used for a reason and made and a molehill was made into a mountain and then kept sacred and covered up only to be found in a modern day. And if it would have never been covered up, none of it would be there today. It makes you wonder how many different places like this up under little mounds over here or over there, because you can get at Göbekli Tepe and look around and you see these mounds and it's like they kind of look like what this does. Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe and enjoy, and we're go on to another topic here, for I have another one closely related. I would go ahead and give a preemptive here, but check it out, it's connected, and I'll make a mention of this whenever we go to it too. Peace.